Hello, my name is William Bauer. I'm the author of this unit. We're going to go through the slides for lesson one. The goal of lesson one is really just about getting students interested in the topic and eliciting their questions. So the unit question is, how can we use biochemistry to improve our school lunch? The lesson level question is, what's in our school lunch and how does it fuel our bodies? So the opening slide for each day is formatted the same. So I have my learning target up here at the top. I have on the left the do now questions are kind of starter warm up. Uh, and then on the right, I have the agenda. And so this is for lesson one, day one. So this first slide is really getting students to share their experience with school lunch. They're going to have strong opinions and think about what changes they want to make. And so leading off of that, the changes that they want to make, well, it turns out that the U.S. Department of Agriculture, they've got opinions and they're going to recommend making changes to the school lunch menu, and that includes reducing added sugars. So we discuss these changes and what's behind them as a class, and then start to brainstorm what their parents or their grandparents might have ate at school. And that's to help us kind of preview for this video we're going to watch in the next slide. So as you get students prepared to watch the video, have them make a notice wonder chart in their notebook. So students are going to watch this YouTube video of kids trying 100 years of school lunch. Is kind of broken down by each decade. It's pretty funny, but make sure the students are also paying attention to the little uh, notes on the video about why these changes are made. Those will become important later. Students have opportunity to rewatch the video for these key moments. So the next activity is for students to make a timeline of these kind of general patterns that have happened and trends that have occurred with the school lunch program over the last 100 years. There's also this great comic that came from Vox News that talks about the changes and the things that have been persistent with school lunch. And so I found this comic book format really engaging for students and does a good job summarizing the complicated history of the school lunch program. Learning a little bit about the history helps prepare students to discuss the criteria and the constraints around designing a school lunch. So the goals historically have changed, and then some of the constraints have changed. In some years, there's budget problems, accessing local food, dietary preferences change. So these are all things that students are going to brainstorm, and we'll keep this list as a class and refer back to it at different times during the unit. After we brainstorm our list, students start to prioritize what are their top three priorities and what are their least important priorities in terms of their criteria and constraints. And we'll use that when we design our initial menu. Now we've moved into day two of lesson one. And we're going to start to think about what are the nutritional needs of students and design our initial model, our initial menu. So one activity to get students a little bit more familiar about what's in their food is a kind of a matching game where there'll be cards that have a food item picture that they'll be familiar with, and then the nutrition facts, and they'll have to match them up and document their choices. Give students an idea of what things are high in protein, fats, or carbohydrates, salt, which are higher in calories, lower in calories. Those would be things that we're going to be revisiting throughout this unit. Another part of this investigation is for students to think about how their age, gender, height, weight, physical activity determines their caloric intake, and what foods they should be eating to meet their calorie needs. They'll use this information to start building their initial model, their initial ideal school menu. And we'll review that from with the criteria and constraints that we generated the day before. So here's a photo of the criteria and constraints that my students had. So wherever you see these red uh, text boxes, it's an indication for you to replace it with the list that your students have generated. As students build their initial menus, there's going to be opportunity for them to share at their table and record similarities and differences in their notebook. Now we're on to day 3 of our first lesson. And at this point, students their table groups are going to share out their menu and get feedback from their classmates. So this slide really kind of describes that process and gives us some questions to discuss. The next part is looking at related phenomena. So we looked at the history of school lunch and how it has evolved. Now we're going to look at what does it look like in other countries. So there's a slide deck of images. Students are going to write down their notice and wonders and their opinions of which school lunch looks the best or the worst. At this point in the unit, I think there's some ground rules that we need to set with our students so that we can discuss food and nutrition in a safe place. So in the upcoming discussion, we'll be talking about food insecurity among children. So that's kind of a touchy subject. There's also food insecurity among these different nations at different levels. So this slide really is here for you to discuss with your class how to talk about these important issues in a safe and respectful way. So we're getting to the end of this lesson, and we're going to start to look at this kind of paradox of rising obesity levels among children and adults. And then at the same time, we're witnessing increase in food insecurity, especially since the COVID pandemic. So we're trying to understand how is there this contradiction or paradox of rising obesity, but also rising food insecurity at the same time. And then we want to be kind of solution focused and think about, well, what role can a school lunch program have in reducing obesity and food insecurity? Now we're on to day 4 of lesson 1. And so the focus of this day of the lesson is to create our driving question board and brainstorm ideas for investigations and start to preview lesson 2. Here's a list of some of the activities students have done across the first 3 days, bringing those back up so that students have a better idea of what questions they should be asking. So here's a list of my students' questions from when I taught this unit. So you want to kind of group them into different categories as they are shared, and then use these categories to kind of pair groups or of students off on becoming kind of the chief investigators of that group of questions. So have them brainstorm ideas for investigations for whatever question groupings that your students come up with. So here's a list of the ideas for investigations that my students came up with. Replace them with what your kids have done. So now we're starting to navigate out of lesson 1 into lesson 2 and think about what should we focus on next. And so our next focus in lesson 2 through 4 is really going to be about this added sugar and carbohydrates in general and understanding those and why our government is wanting us to reduce the amount of added sugars in our diet. Thanks for listening.